Ja jestem Patrycja Nowulska, jestem koordynatorką programu w Polsko-Amerykańskiej Komisji Fulbrighta i są ze mną moje koleżanki z komisji, Justyna Kozyra-Bower, Ola Szaniawska, która tutaj czuła technicznie, i widziałam Paulinę Kubylis, która gdzieś się tu skryła. Bardzo się cieszę, że jesteście. No i jest z nami absolwentka. Bardzo Ci dziękuję, Natalia, za to, że z nami jesteś i poprowadzisz to spotkanie. Tym bardziej, że Natalia sama aplikowała na studia graduate w Stanach, więc ma dodatkowe doświadczenie i myślę, że jak najbardziej może Wam pokazać, jak taki proces nastawienia powinien wyglądać, tym bardziej, że właśnie ma perspektywę amerykańskiej uczelni. Natalia, oddaję Tobie głos i bym poprosiła jeszcze Cię o kilka zdań może na Twój temat, co teraz robisz, gdzie byłaś w Polsce podczas swojego Fulbrighta, i już kończę w takim razie. Dziękuję bardzo.
Hi, dzień dobry. Nazywam się Natalia, but this presentation will be in English. So just a brief history about me. I attended the University of Maryland for my undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering, then applied for a Fulbright and was placed in Białystok at the University of Białystok. And right now I'm attending the University of Maryland School of Medicine. And in all of those steps, I had to write a personal statement. So I have a little bit of experience writing different kinds of personal statements, whether it has to do with research or applying to graduate school or sort of explaining about what your passions and where your enthusiasm lies. So we're going to be taking sort of a deeper dive into how unique each and every one of you are and how you can use that to really benefit and sell yourself when you're writing your personal statement. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get ready for the presentation. All right. So let's go ahead and begin. If at any point you have any questions, please feel free to unmute. It's sort of difficult on one screen to be monitoring the chat, so I do apologize if I miss any of your questions, but we do have a little break in between the two sessions in order to answer any of your questions. So I recommend doing it however you feel most comfortable. All right. So we're going to start out with a pretty simple question, which usually ends up causing a little bit of stress in everybody who needs to write it. But what is a personal statement? So does anybody know what a personal statement is? It's okay if you don't. That's the point of this talk. So personal statement, if you look at the general description of it, it's basically an admissions or application essay, and you can give a statement of purpose or a personal statement. It's an essay or written statement, and it's for a prospective student applying to a college or to a graduate school, to really any kind of professional program. And that's sort of a boring definition. I get it, right? Nobody wants to read a definition that's four lines long. So what I really bring it down to is a personal statement is literally just a story. And when you break it down to something that simple, it doesn't seem like a daunting task anymore. It's a story about you. It's a story about how you became who you are and how you grew your interests. And it's like if your friend was coming and asking you, why do you want to pursue science? Why do you want to pursue this research? Why do you want to pursue this medicine? How would you explain that story to your friend? Of course, you'd use a little bit more professional language in an actual personal statement, but it's really that simple. And if you think about it that way, it sort of takes a little bit of that stress away. So let's go ahead and move on to from a student's perspective, right? Because there's two perspectives. When you're writing a personal statement, you have the student's perspective, the one who's writing it, and the actual interviewer or reviewer perspective. So we're going to sort of talk about both. So from a student perspective, the personal statement really allows you to express your love for the subject and shows your motivation and commitment. So we're going to be also talking about the different steps that it takes and what you should be mentioning in your personal statement. But to be honest, like I said, it's like a story. How did you fall in love with what you're applying for? It allows you to sell yourself and allows you to leave a lasting impression. So I also helped interview Fulbright applicants from the United States coming to Poland last year. And I have to say that there were a couple of standout personal statements that I remember even today. I also helped hire students at the University of Maryland for this department that I ran on campus. And the personal statements that really were gut-wrenching, that made me connect and feel an emotional bond with the person, were the ones that left a lasting impression. And more often than not, those people not only got hired, but they also got promoted very quickly. Now, from the reader's perspective, so from the reviewer who's actually going to be reading and deciding whether or not to accept you. So this plays a key role in the application process. It used to be that they only paid attention to SAT scores and GPAs, but now more often than not, we have a more holistic application process where they will read your essay along with looking at your grades. And this will also, once again, be able to prove your motivation and enthusiasm for whatever thing you are applying for. But sort of the more scary thing is that it can actually be used to reject applicants. I know from my own personal experience and from friends who work on admissions committees all over the United States that there are times where they will reject somebody who has the most perfect GPA, perfect SAT scores, perfect everything else but personal statement. Because the personal statement allows us to see that there's a person behind those numbers, that there is not a robot. There's somebody who actually has feelings, has motivation. And so these personal statements can actually force us to reject applicants who otherwise might be great when it comes to studying, but they lack that humanistic touch that a lot of programs now are looking for. So what makes a good personal statement, right? Sort of 5 simple things. So you want to show that you're enthusiastic about the subject and that you have experience and engagement with the subject, right? We call it the 3 E's: enthusiasm, experience, and engagement. You want to make sure that you show all of them, right? That you have had love for this subject from a very young age or even a recent age, but that you've worked on that and that you've looked for different opportunities to pursue that. Then you want to make sure that you show your relevant knowledge and skills. So all of the experience in the world won't mean anything if you can't actually speak on what you learned from those experiences. So you have to take it a little step further, not just say that you were part of some program or part of an internship. You have to say what you actually learned from it. And then the most important thing is the independence and uniqueness of thought. I read a personal statement once for undergraduate admission that had to do with a gross, soggy banana. And I have to say, this was 7 years ago, and I have never forgotten it because it was so unique. So you want to make sure that you show your uniqueness and who you really are when you're actually writing your personal statement. And that is probably the most important thing. And if you leave here knowing only one thing, it's knowing that you should be unique and you should be independent in your thought when you're writing your personal statement. Now, so there's a little pathway to a successful personal statement. And this is something that we were taught when we were in high school about how to write a personal statement, but I'm not sure how they teach it in Poland. So I thought that we would just quickly go over it. So the first step is to self-reflect. So before I write a personal statement, I do take around 30 minutes to sit and to think about why I'm writing this. Why am I applying to this program? And so you have some insight into your life's experiences. What made you you? How can you connect that to the question that they are asking in the personal statement? Then what I do is free write. You literally write down everything that you can possibly think of. You ignore grammar, paragraph organization. You don't care if you don't capitalize or leave punctuation. You're just writing every thought that comes to mind that you want to write about. Because this is the moment where you're going to actually be able to express certain emotionality that you would lose if you were trying to create that structure. So you don't want that structure, you want that uniqueness at first. Then after you free write and you get all your thoughts down, you revise. So that's when you start looking at the organization of your paragraphs. Which stories and which moments can I bring together into paragraph form so that it flows? Because you want that fluency when somebody's reading it. After you revise, you want to get outside feedback. And this is really, really important. So don't feel awkward or uncomfortable that you're sharing something. Find somebody who you trust and give them this piece of work that you are writing about and have them review. Because something that might make sense to you, especially when you're writing in a second language, might not make sense to somebody who actually speaks in that language. And I know that from my own experience writing in Polish, where sometimes I lose certain parts of speech that I don't think are important, but actually are. And these things change the meaning of my sentences. And this is also for spelling, because as we know, the English language can be a little bit tricky at times, as can the Polish language, as I'm sure you all know. So making sure that there is that flow and that grammar from an outside source. Afterwards, you revise and proofread a second time, or a third time, or a fourth time. I have to say, for my Fulbright personal statement, I believe I worked on it for maybe 3 months. That's a lot of revisions. I think I had maybe 9 or 10 revisions in that time. So review the edits of the outside person who reviewed your personal statement, and also think about how you can continue adding more. You don't have to agree with everything your outside person reviews. So I remember my dad had a lot of different edits for my essays, and I didn't take all of them, because you don't have to. At the end of the day, this is about you, and you're not going to write something that's a lie or something that isn't who you actually are. So make sure to keep that in mind too. You don't have to accept all the edits. You accept the ones that you think actually benefit your writing. And then once again, proofread. Please don't have any basic spelling mistakes. The number one thing that I see is resources versus recourses. And if you think that's obvious now that I'm saying it out loud, when you actually write it on paper, the little switch between the S and the C doesn't seem that big, but it actually is. And then at the very end, you submit, and make sure you know your deadline. So make sure that you have those deadlines. You've switched over the time zone so that you're not mixing it up. All right. So then there's something really important called angles. And as you can see, we have 2 big angles here, right? And you have the skinny part of the angle, which is where you have the most specific thing that you're going to write about. And then you have the bigger part of the angle, which is the more general things that you're going to write about in your essay. And how I like to organize essays is to have those 2 angles, because it brings it back to what the specific thing that you were talking about before. And we're going to focus on one example of mine. So I recently applied for a research grant, and they asked for a personal statement. I'm going to talk to you about the angles that I focused on, and then at the end of this talk, we're actually going to be able to read through my personal statement and annotate it and see exactly what I did correctly and incorrectly, and that will really put into practice what we're talking about today. So, angles. What did I start with? I started with a very specific story about a time when I worked in a research lab and my boss took advantage of my skills and published the paper of my work without giving me any credit. And I had spent 50 hours a week working on this project, and I got none of the credit for it. And so what happened then? Well, then it became a little bit more general. I learned to actually hate research because I didn't like the fact that I was taken advantage of. I didn't like the fact that as a student, I didn't have a voice. And so that made me actually hate research, which was really funny, because what ended up happening is I became an engineer as an undergrad. And as an engineer, we have to do a lot of research, a lot. And I was not looking forward to it. That was actually my least favorite part of engineering. And I was really nervous about it going into college. But then after my first year, I actually did a research project at the Bujikoma Research Facility, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. I think it's funded by Eva Błaszczyk, who is an actress. And I did an amazing research project there with a new technology that actually allows us to communicate with people in a coma. And then I realized in that moment that I don't hate research. I really just hated the fact that I was taken advantage of and that I didn't have any leadership over my own project. And so that was my pivotal moment. See, that's the middle of that angle. That moment was that pivotal moment where now I recognize the fact that it wasn't research that I hated. It was a little subset of research, but I was actually really enjoying research. But then there was that leadership component of it. And I realized that we really needed to work on that leadership when it came to young women and men in science so that they wouldn't be taken advantage of. And so my second year of college, I created a nonprofit called Foundational Learning and Mentorship Experience, or FLAME. And that allowed to instill these kinds of leadership skills in younger men and women so that they would have the confidence later on to be able to advocate for themselves. So as you see, we're starting to form this sort of angled triangle, very specific going to more general, and then that pivotal moment in the middle where I actually learned something. Remember I talked about what it was the knowledge and the skills that you learned from your experience? this was the knowledge and the skills that I learned from my experience. And then we go back that I recognize now that research is actually good when it has long-term positive effects on the patient. And I feel like I'm actually helping somebody as opposed to getting taken advantage of. And then I end with another specific story that I want to do leadership research in medicine, in medical schools, so that students can actually advocate for themselves. So as you can see, we started out specific, got more general, and then became specific again. And that's the way that you should be thinking about your angles when it comes to your personal statement. You want to focus on something that has to do with whatever you're applying to, and you work your way through that story. This is my story for why I like research and why I should get this research grant. And it's something that I would tell anybody, including all my friends, if they asked me why I like research. All right. So now we're going to go into some general pieces of advice before we actually start working on your personal statement. So no cliches, right? Cliches are things that they're phrases or opinions that are overused and lack originality of thought, right? You don't want to say, I enjoy science and want to help people. So does everybody, right? If you're going into science or you're going into medicine, everybody wants to help somebody, right? You want to avoid using quotations from other people. Your personal statement is you. Don't quote Nelson Mandela. Don't quote Oprah Winfrey, because that happens quite a lot. This is about you. These are your quotations, your life quotations. And then don't start out for as long as I can remember. So research shows that this is the #1 way that students start their personal statements. And let me tell you, every time I see this statement, I automatically get bored, just straight off the bat. It's just a thing that happens. So try and make sure not to start it out this way. And I'm going to show you in my actual example, I like starting out with a quote, my own quote from my life. And you'll be able to see that in just a second. The next thing is to show, don't tell. And this is also extremely important. So when I said to leave this talk knowing only one thing, let me just say 2 things. This is the other thing that you should know other than independence and uniqueness of thought. So showing, don't telling. This means that sensory details and actions are much more important than just narration or exposition. So showing illustrates, whereas telling merely states. And we're going to look at an example of that right now. So we have showing. As his mother switched off the light and left the room, Michael tensed. He huddled under the covers, gripped the sheets, and held his breath as the wind brushed past the curtain. What does this mean? If you were to read this, it would probably imply that he is scared of the dark. But it never says that, because it's showing that he is. And this is what you should be doing in your essays. Showing that you learned a skill, showing that you were empathetic towards a patient or towards something else, as opposed to just saying that you did it. So telling would be, Michael was terribly afraid of the dark. But even reading that, it's sort of boring. You would much rather read an essay that shows you that he's afraid of the dark, because then you feel like you're actually there. You feel like you're emotionally tied to the story. And that's something that I keep mentioning time and time again, that you want the reader to feel emotionally invested in your story, because then they're going to see that there's a person on paper. All right, so now we're going to take a little bit of a break. And what I want you to do is I want you to go grab a piece of paper or a journal or anything to write on and a pen, because we're actually going to be planning your personal statement right now. So I'm going to give you all just a moment. And if there's anybody who wants to unmute to ask any questions or put anything in the chat, I can go ahead and read them and answer them right now, but I'll give you a couple minutes just to grab what you need to grab in order to write your own personal statement.
To ja tylko może jeden komentarz dodam. Naprawdę korzystajcie z tej okazji, że macie szansę zadać pytania. Naprawdę myślę, że to jest super okazja, więc jeżeli ktoś jakiekolwiek, nawet głupie pytanie mu się wydaje, mamy Bruna. Także zapraszamy Bruna. Nie wiem, czy możesz się sam...
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Okay, hi. I have a question about telling your story in the personal statement. Can I write all the points that made me me? But should I just wrote about the specific topic and subject that I want to study? Or can I just write a larger history of me in order to show how I want to study that subject? Thank you.
Yes, so you should be writing something more specific. So when I said it's the story of you, it's the story of you under the umbrella of what you are applying for. My personal statement has changed when I was writing an essay for undergrad versus for Fulbright versus for medical school, because that personal statement should change depending on what you are applying for. So if you're applying for a research grant, right, which I think some of you are, you should be writing about why you got interested in that kind of research, why you got interested in research in general, and then why you got interested in this specific kind of research. What research have you done about it previously? So no, you shouldn't start out by saying, I was born on this day with this many siblings and my mother raised me to be, no. That is for your autobiography once you publish your research and you become famous for it, right? But for now, when you just have a personal statement for a specific question of why should you get this grant, why should you get this position, you should make it specific and tailored to that position. And that's why I showed you the little angles graph. You want the angles to have to do with the question that they're asking. So not too general, you want to make sure to have it more specific to what they're asking. All right, any other questions before we move on?
I actually have a question. For example, as you said that some points in the essay or the personal statement make you feel kind of bored, then is there anything that kind of makes you feel really excited about writing the personal statement, or things that really get like, oh, this is a good personal statement?
Yes, so there's a number of things that actually get me really excited. I think the number one thing is getting a very internal look at you. And we're going to sort of go over this in this next section coming up, but really sort of displaying yourself open, being honest about what's going on. I can't tell you how many personal statements I've written about my failures and what I learned from them, right? And it's embarrassing. Some of those things are embarrassing to talk about because you don't want to write about your failures. But I find that I learn the most from the failures. So who I am today is actually much more dependent on my failures than it was on any of my successes. So I like writing about that, and I like reading about that as well, because that shows me that you have that insight to recognize the fact that your failures are not embarrassing to you, but rather they're something that is in your arsenal, a tool in your arsenal that you can use to learn from. Because if you get a grant, right, what did you really gain from it? You know that you're good enough to get the grant, that's about it. But when you don't get the grant, that's when you recognize, ooh, I need to work on something. What should I work on? And that leads to that growth. And it's that growth that you want to show in the personal statement, the growth that you went through. So that is the big thing that I like to read. I think it's the best tool that you can use to write your personal statement is sort of displaying yourself open, no matter how embarrassing it can be, and talking about that kind of growth. And then I also like hearing a lot about unique things. So if you ever did anything or met anyone unique that really changed your life, talk about that as well. And I'm going to go sort of into some of my more unique things that I've done in my life as well, and you'll see some of those examples. But I like mentioning those as well, because it means that I'm comfortable going out of my comfort zone and experiencing something that nobody really has before. So I don't know if you guys know the poem by Robert Frost, talking about taking the path less taken, less trodden. And that's the path that I like to take, and I like to show that. And that's what you guys should be trying to focus on in your essays as well.
One more comment, Natalia, if I may. Just to put today's webinar in the context of the webinar that we had 2 days ago about the research objectives essay, because I know many of the participants have attended that one too. While the research objectives essay talks about all the what's and how's of your research project, the big question of the personal statement is why you. So echoing what Natalia has said, that's where the reviewers in the selection committee want to learn how your life experiences and educational journey led to apply for Fulbright, and not the specifics of your research project.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. The specifics of why you're interested in the research project maybe, but not the actual research project.
Exactly.
All right, perfect. So now you guys have the benefit of actually working on your personal statement right now. Or if you already started working on it, to sort of edit it. So why don't we go through certain steps? So we have a plan, right? Pretty simple, a plan. How did this plan get to being a plan? What did you start out with? Pretty simple question. When you want to get a plant, what do you go by? Seeds, right? You go and buy the seeds to be able to get the plant. But then it's not just seeds that actually allow you to get this plant. You have to have other things as well. So what are those other things? So we have dirt or potting mix. We have water, sunlight, and then a little bit of plant food if you want to be special, right? I am particularly bad at taking care of plants, so I buy a lot of plant food because that helps save all my plants from dying. But you need all of these things to get a successful plant, right? You start out with the seeds, but you need these other steps in order to have this growth. But all of these different things can actually help you write your personal statement. So seeds. Seeds are where you came from. And I have a couple of questions or examples that I'm going to show here, but what I want you to do right now is I want you to write down what your seeds are. So seeds are where you came from. So how did you start out? Were you part of a nuclear family? A nuclear family is a mom and a dad and then, you know, a kid or two, just a normal family. Or were you raised by a single mother or father? Did you happen to have 7 siblings that you had to help take care of? Or did your grandparents play a part in your upbringing because your mom and dad couldn't? So where did you come from? These are your seeds. So I want you to take a moment right now to think about what your seeds are. And if you don't have anything unique about your seeds, that's fine as well. I grew up in a pretty nuclear family. I didn't have really anything special about my childhood. But then that could be leading to growth. I recognized in college that I was a very privileged student. I didn't have to deal with some of the things my friends had to deal with when it came to home life. So I recognized that privilege and I used that privilege to help others. That was my growth here. And if you don't have any growth, that's fine as well. Just write down what you think your seeds are. I'm going to give you a moment, just a couple seconds to write them down. All right, next we have the potting mix. These are the things that provide a foundation for your interest, right? Just like dirt is a foundation for a plant, these are the things that actually made you interested in what you're interested in. So here's some examples. Did your friend buy you a science experimentation kit for your 6th birthday? And that was your first experience with science. Did you spend a lot of time in the forest learning about animals? And now you're doing a research project about some animals that live in the forest. In 5th grade, did you take a science class that made you really interested in the things that you wanted to pursue? Did you accidentally sign up for a class that made you realize you love research? I did that in high school. That's actually what led me to my original first research project. Were you part of any clubs or discussion groups that made you recognize that there's so much more in the world that you want to learn about than what you originally had? Or did you have a role model that sort of talked to you about your interests and helped you specify what you wanted to do with your life? So think about what your potting mix is right now. What are these things that provided that foundation for your interest? And I'll give you just about a minute to write them down. All right, then we have the water. So these are the experiences that grew your interest. I have to say the Polish word for the watering can, I think it's konewka. It's probably one of my favorite words in Polish. It's so cute. And I love using it. So what are the experiences that grew your interest? So you have internships, jobs, volunteer opportunities, trips, interviews and seminars, conferences, courses, museum visits, anything and everything that made you grow upon that initial foundation of your interest. You realized you liked science. You realized you liked research. Well, then what did you do to learn about it? What did you do to really experience what that is and what it means? It could have even been as simple as a conversation with a researcher that you really look up to, somebody whose research you've been reading for years and finally you got a chance to meet them. These are the things that you actually signed up for in order to pursue what you want to do. So I'll give you another minute to sort of organize your thoughts. All right, and now we have the sun. So the things that helped you grow. And we have both people and pivotal experiences. So people that helped you grow could have been your role models, your parents, your boss, a teacher. It could have been anybody who supported you constantly throughout and who gave you the tools to be able to be successful. And I mentioned my boss in undergrad when I worked at a department on campus. He gave me so many leadership tools and he gave me so many opportunities to create programs that longitudinally positively affected the students who were on campus. And I'm eternally grateful for him because I would have never gotten that experience anywhere else. Because who gives a 20-some-year-old student the ability to create a program or even have a budget or deal with money? That was my growth in that position. And funny enough, I actually didn't get that position in the beginning, which was my pivotal experience. I was actually rejected from that job the first time that I applied. And I had to spend the next semester really learning about where the gaps were in my own personality and in my own experience so that the next time I applied, I could actually get the job. And then I ended up excelling because I spent that time growing and having that insight into who I am. So the pivotal experiences can be a time when you failed and got back up, just like what I talked about. Or it can be a time that you succeeded and you won something or you got something and you were on stage accepting an award or the money rolled into your bank account and you realized, this is not for me. I don't like this. I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. That is also a pivotal experience that you should talk about because those are very rare. And it also shows that you have insight into who you are as a person and what your likes and dislikes are. You're not going to be just a plastic bag floating through the wind. You're actually going to know exactly what you want to do. So I'm going to give you a minute to write down the things that helped you grow in your life. All right, and then lastly is the plant food or the unique experiences that molded you. But these are the things that are standing out to me in essays as well. Did you have an internship that no one else had? Did you get to meet someone who changed your life, whether it be a role model or a celebrity, but somebody who really had an impact on your life, not just a celebrity who you've wanted to meet and suddenly you see them as you're walking up the street. No, this is somebody who actually had a conversation with you and who made you rethink the way that you want to organize your life. Did you have something good or bad happen to your family? Did you have a loved one get sick? Or did you suffer from a natural disaster? These things can be good or bad. They don't just have to be bad. A lot of times people think they just have to be bad. No, they can be really, really good as well. A lot of times the bad ones are the things that affect you the most, but you can also have very good things that change the trajectory of your life. So as an example, I had this incredible internship in Nepal in Asia where I was actually on the helicopter ambulance service in the Himalayan mountains. First student ever to do that. I had nobody who could advise me about what clothes to bring, what water to drink, how to dress, how to act in Nepal. I had to do that all on my own, all that research. But now that I've done it, other students are interested in doing it as well. But I was the first one to do that, and that's my unique experience, because nobody else can speak on that experience other than me. And I'm sure that some of you have similar experiences, even if you're not the only one. If you were one of 5 or 10 students to do something, you still did something that 0.0000001% of the population has had the opportunity to do. So take a moment, think about those things that actually affected how you were going to organize your life, and write them down on this piece of paper. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at an example of my research project essay. That is going to be submitted on Monday, but I figured I'd give you guys a sneak peek about what I wrote about when it comes to this research grant. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute so I can go ahead and pull this up. All right. So I think it was mentioned before that you want to make sure that your personal statement is separate from your research objectives. I have something similar. I have all my research objectives in a separate document. My personal statement, though, is more about me and not my research. I'm not talking about my research here specifically. I'm talking about me and why I'm interested in it. So my personal statement, the question was, express why the student wishes to pursue the program and how the program may benefit the student. So I'm going to read this out loud to you because I think it's a great example of how to work on your angles and how to make sure that you're talking about your unique experiences. All right, so let's begin. Natalia, can you come into my office, please? That was the department research head of my protein purification lab calling me into his office with a tone of voice that made me feel like I had done something wrong. He started interrogating me about my project, asking me why it was taking me so long to plate bacteria and run a gel. I was extremely confused. This sounded nothing like my research project. It only took a couple more questions for the research head to realize what had happened. I had been given a postdoc level project as a high schooler with none of the proper training or mentorship. My actual PI was never in the lab, and I ended up working with radioactive chemicals with no protection, dealing with expensive equipment that I had never received training for, and logging over 30 hours a week in addition to school to get through my protocol before my protein denatured. To add insult to injury, the work I had done for almost a year was published under someone else's name, and I received none of the credit for the project I had spent laborious hours trying to perfect. So who can blame me for promising myself in that moment that I would never want to do research again? The high school student who was incredibly excited about research, who took extra research and design classes, and who at one point wanted to get a PhD, was now completely done with pursuing research projects. It was a funny twist of fate that I ended up becoming an engineer during my undergraduate studies. Engineering required a lot of research, and that was the part of the major that I was least looking forward to. But undergrad was also the moment I started to seriously pursue my medical interests. After my freshman year, I interned in a coma research facility called Budzik, or Alarm Clock, in Warsaw, Poland. Though I had originally gone there for the medical immersion, I was asked if I wanted to jump onto a research project using a new technology called MindBeagle that would supposedly allow doctors to communicate with coma patients. My interest in the technology won out over my dislike for research, and I started tracking coma patients' responses to the technology. To my surprise, I found myself enjoying the research. I would run around to different patient rooms with my little research notebook to set them up for the EEG cap and take tedious notes during test runs. I realized that I could actually enjoy research as long as it was a project I was passionate about. I came back from Poland armed with the new notion that I could do research and also enjoy it. I started to pick and choose projects that I was passionate about, which led me to create my nonprofit foundational learning and mentorship experience, Flame. FLAME gives underprivileged Title I middle and elementary school students in Maryland the opportunity to gain confidence and leadership skills necessary to be successful in scientific fields through practical lab work. I knew that evolving leadership skills in the scientific fields was extremely important, which was proven by the fact that the students part of FLAME began raising their hands more often in class to answer questions and get feedback, and improve their grades from a C level to an A level. All of that paled in comparison to when one of my middle school students who previously had never expressed interest in higher education stated at the end of a particularly interesting civil engineering lesson that she wants to go to college and study science. My PRISM project takes the foundation of leadership interest I started with FLAME and applies it to medicine. There has not been enough research done on leadership curricula in medical schools, where arguably one of the most important attributes of a successful physician is leadership. The purpose of PRISM is to encourage students to consider the possibility of careers that include research. For a long time, I wanted nothing to do with research, but I have now found a project I have immense passion for, a project that will allow me to take my first steps into clinical and academic medicine and bring about real change to medical education in the United States. So we took everything that we learned about in the last 45 minutes and we applied it into an actual personal statement. You saw my angles, starting with specific stories and ending with a specific story. And then all the things in the middle, and that pivotal moment in the middle where I talked about how I actually realized that I do like research when it's about something I'm passionate about and I can be a leader in my own project. And you had a lot of examples of showing and not telling. So instead of saying that these students in FLAME felt like they were better leaders, I actually showed it. I said that they raised their hands in class and that their grades improved, that they asked for feedback. That's showing and not telling. Imagine if that entire paragraph was just me saying, you know what, the students really felt like they were better leaders at the end. Who cares? I can't prove that. But with showing, I can prove that actually they became better leaders. Another example of showing and not telling is talking about how I actually liked the research, running around to different patient rooms with my research notebook, setting them up with the EEG cap, and taking tedious notes during test runs. Those are all sensory words that makes the reader feel like they're actually there watching me do this in the facility. And these are the kinds of examples and the kinds of things that you should be doing in your personal statement as well. You should be showing and not telling, and then using these very unique experiences to talk about your story and why you should get chosen for this project. All right, so that is the end of my presentation. We finished just a tad bit early so that you guys can ask any questions that you may have. I will also drop my email into the chat in case you guys have any specific questions that you're worried about, or you didn't understand part of the presentation, you think it's going to take too long for me to re-explain it. But I am going to drop my email into here. There we go. Yes, okay, so the question is about the seed part in it. I didn't go that deep into talking about my upbringing. Yes, I didn't, because it wasn't important for this specific personal statement. I do in my medical school statement, and I did in my Fulbright essay. But for research, I wasn't born doing research, right? Research started in high school. So I started, my seeds are not about my upbringing, they're more about what happened in high school with my story that caused that plant to start growing. Those were the seeds that started dying a little bit in the beginning, and then they found a new rebirth when I started doing research in Poland. So the seed part, I think I should maybe re-explain. The seed part doesn't have to just do with your upbringing. It's the foundation of whatever you're writing about. It's the start of whatever you're writing about. And that start can be from birth. It can be when you're 10, 15, 20, 30, even 40 years old. All right. And then I think there's more of a administrative question about 1,000 words in the research objective and personal statement.
Patricia, could you reply to this one? And in the meantime,
maybe
maybe you can reply to it on the chat. And in the meantime, I just wanted to comment that, Natalia, I think your presentation and examples are absolutely brilliant. And also based on my experience, having worked with applications for some time, a memorable hook right in the first paragraph is what can really help you stand out. And it can be a story like in Natalia's example, and an engaging question or even some statistics. But the point is that the opening paragraph should grab the reader by the throat and pull them into the story, which I think your story absolutely did.
Thank you. Yeah, it's called a hook, right? So if you imagine a fish hook, literally just coming in, grabbing somebody, and then pulling them into the story. That's why the whole, for as long as I can remember the cliche I mentioned, for as long as I can remember, that's not a hook. That's something that anybody can start the essay out with. And I like starting them out with personal stories. I think that works out much better for me. So any other questions?
So I have a question. I would like to know if the language of my personal statement should be more of an formal one, or could it be informal? Is it specified?
So that is a very, I would say, it's a sort of a more tough question, because my essay sounded a little bit informal. No, I didn't really use any big overarching words that maybe might be difficult to understand, but I chose my words very specifically. So that informal language was chosen specifically so that the reader would get drawn in as if they're having a conversation with me. And that takes a little bit of practice. And that's why I can't say that you should be using formal or informal language, because it very much depends on what you're comfortable with and what you have experience in. My first couple personal statements were very formal. But what I find with very formal personal statements is that they lack that emotional factor, because you're trying so hard to use these big words that you end up losing the actual emotional aspect of your writing, which tends to be a little bit more informal. So it's really a balance. It's a balance of how comfortable you feel with the language, especially as a second language. It really depends. I would err on the side of caution, but I would also make sure to turn your essay into somebody who's an outside reader, because they're going to be able to tell you whether you're being too formal or whether you're being too informal, and that your essay now is sort of falling apart. So it's a balance. That's the final answer. It's a balance between being formal and informal.
I see. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? All right. Well, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I have a question, because how can you find this thing which is unique about you if at the first sight you can just think that you're a normal girl and you just don't have anything which can really that someone can be really interested about you, and how to find this thing?
All right. Well, I can tell you right now, just based off your voice, you're not boring. You're very interesting, as is everybody in this talk right now. Yeah, nobody is boring. Throw that thought out of your mind. You are not boring. You are not normal. Nobody's normal. Nobody has a normal life. This whole notion of somebody having a normal life is written about in books, but it doesn't exist in real life. You have experience that molded you to be you. And they might not seem unique to you because you're like, oh, you know, some other girl in my city or wherever I live experiences the same thing. But that's not the case. Something unique to somebody who's in America is if you wear the traditional Polish dress and you take part in dances once a month. That is something unique. It might not seem unique to you, but it is unique to me. It's unique to anybody who's reading it in the United States. Singing for your church choir can be something unique. You get some position that somebody else, you know, in your research lab, some new position, they create a new position for you. That's something unique. Trying some food during a trip is something unique that nobody else has. I can guarantee that if me and you sat down and we started talking about your life, I could find a whole page of unique experiences. And it might be a little bit difficult because you might think, oh, you know, this is something that other people experience, right? The uniqueness is not because you're the only one in the entire world to do it. It's because the uniqueness comes from the fact that it actually had an impact on you, an impact that it might not have on somebody else. And you can talk about that impact in your personal statement, right? Somebody else who dances might have not felt that it was unique because for them, it was just dancing. But for you, it was getting in touch with your inner pole. It was getting to know the culture that you came from. It had to do with getting to know your great-grandparents who you haven't seen for 15 years. And all of a sudden, you get a chance to meet them because of this dance. Those are the things. It's the impact that's unique. If that makes sense.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. No problem. Any other questions?
I might have one, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Natalia. Thank you. I think you picked up on the topic that I was really thinking about when you were doing your presentation. It's the topic of having a passion for something else than our academics only. So do you see it as a great way of reflecting on who we are as a person by talking about this other passion in academics and then maybe connecting it to how it makes us want to excel in our academic side as well?
Yes, 100%. Those are also really great essays that stand out because they don't always originally have to do with what the question is asking about, right? They have to do with something that you are passionate about and that led you maybe to have some kind of growth that now gives you this research project. But that's a little bit different, right? Because you're not so laser focused on just one thing. You're talking about something else that makes you who you are. And now me reading it, I know a little bit more. I know a little bit more about who you are as a person. And that makes me more excited to maybe meet you if you come and you get this research grant. So yes, you can use it. That is totally acceptable. You don't just have to talk about your research. You can talk about other things that are passionate about with a thin line to your research, just a thin line. It doesn't have to be a thick line or a rope. It can be a very thin line that connects the two together. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
No problem. All right, so what is considered leadership skills and activities do I have to lead someone? So leadership as a word does have a very specific definition, but I would say in your personal statement, you don't have to mention that you were somebody's boss or that you were in charge of something. Leadership really comes from the skills and the knowledge that you gain from it. Remember what I said, it's all about impact. It's about impact more so than it is about anything else. So as an example, let me just think of something that could be, it could be something completely random that all of a sudden, in your research lab, you are the bottom of the totem pole, right? You have so many people above you, but all of a sudden something goes wrong. But you happen to have read the night before about how to fix that. And so you quickly jump in and fix it. You were a leader in that situation. You weren't a leader overall because the PI and the person in your lab is probably yelling directions and stuff, but you jumped in and you did something. You were a leader in that moment. You showed leadership skills. You showed the fact that under pressure, you can perform well. You showed the fact that you can advocate for yourself and for others. So think about the leadership skills, not so much as just leadership, but the skills portion of it is much more important than just the leadership name. I hope all those answers make sense. All right, any other questions? All right, well, we're right on time. I popped my email into the group chat, so please feel free to email me if you have any subsequent questions or something didn't make sense. I don't think I'm going to be able to read through all 50 of your personal statements or however many people are on this call. So if you have a certain section of your personal statement that you're worried about, you can let me know. But just know that I am doing a lot of other things too, so it might take me a second to reply back. But I'm here to help in case you guys have any questions.
Thank you, Natalia, very much. It was great, really. It was a great presentation. Thank you so much.
No problem.